It's one thing to deport somebody back to their home country. It's an entirely different matter to throw somebody into a El Salvadoran prison for life. And if you are of the position like, I don't care, I'm more than willing to see completely innocent people, not just innocent in the sense that, oh, all they did was cross the border illegally, which I don't think that merits life in prison in El Salvador, but maybe you do. But innocent people, people who entered the United States the right way, who sought legal asylum in a legal port of entry, clearly fleeing persecution, and you're going to say, I don't care if those innocent people spend life in prison in a dungeon in El Salvador. I'm sorry, but that is a failure of humanity. It's almost sociopathic not to care about that. That's the question that was brought to the Supreme Court. The government appealed the restraining order, the injunction issued by Judge Boasberg, and the court issued its ruling yesterday. There you see the caption, Donald J. Trump, President of the United States, versus JGG, which is one of the people who were going to be deported with no due process. And the government applied to vacate the injunction issued by Boasberg. So let me just explain something. This has been reported as a huge victory for Donald Trump. Conservatives were celebrating, the Supreme Court ruled that Trump's deportations can go ahead, they're all legal. That's not remotely what happened. It was a 5-4 ruling. In dissent were the 3 liberal judges, Kagan, Sotomayor, and Judge Jackson, and they were joined by Amy Coney Barrett, a Trump-supported judge, a Trump-appointed judge. But here's the thing. The majority said, we're vacating the injunction simply for procedural reasons. The ACLU sued in Washington, in Washington, D.C., that's where Judge Boasberg is, on the grounds that that's where the United States is, so that's where you're suing, because you're suing the United States. And the 5 justices on the Supreme Court said, no, that's the wrong place to sue. The only place you can bring a habeas corpus hearing, which is a judicial proceeding to say that you've been wrongfully imprisoned, is in the place where you're being detained. You can't bring it in Washington, D.C. If you're detained in Texas, you have to bring it in Texas. And so they basically said this was brought in the wrong court, so we're taking it away from Judge Boasberg, which obviously conservatives were happy about. They demonized Judge Boasberg, even though, I'm just telling you, he's a very ordinary judge. There are left-wing judges in the federal judiciary. Not many, but some. I mean, real left-wing. Like, if you think Bill Clinton and Chuck Schumer are left-wing, then yes, Judge Boasberg's left-wing. But like the actual left, people who like work for legal aid or like NGOs or left-wing activists, there are very few of those who get through the Senate. They're mostly like corporate lawyers and prosecutors, even who the Democratic presidents select. But in any event, they took it away from Judge Boasberg, and what they said was, every time there's a detainee who's about to be deported, they have the right to sue the U.S. government and ask for a habeas corpus hearing in a federal court to require the government to present evidence of their guilt and for them to disprove the accusations. Now, note, this is not for every deportation. Deportations can continue as they always have. You just go to that DOJ court, that deportation court, all you have to prove is they're here illegally. You don't have to prove they committed any crime, they're bad people, nothing. Just that they entered illegally, they don't have legal authorization to stay in the U.S. The deportation court authorizes the deportation and you send them back to their country of origin. This only applies to the invocation of the Alien Enemies Act, which grants Trump immense power. And they believe, the government believes, that once that is invoked, Trump can send them anywhere, even to an El Salvador prison, and doesn't have to give them a hearing to contest the accusations against them. Doesn't have to give this gay makeup artist an opportunity to go into court and say, I'm not a member of Tren de Aragua, I'm a gay makeup artist. They've misinterpreted my tattoos. Here, you can see them. I'll tell you exactly what they are. And there probably are some judges who won't care. They'll just say, Trump administration can do whatever they want. But most human beings would not easily consign people to life imprisonment if they're innocent. So it's at least an opportunity for them to prove it. Let the public hear as well. And all 9 justices of the Supreme Court, all 9 of them, not just Sotomayor and Kagan and Brown Jackson, or even Amy Coney Barrett, but Justice Alito, Justice Thomas, Justice Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, John Roberts, all of them together, all 9 unanimously said, we agree that the United States government cannot deport people under the Alien Enemies Act unless you first give them an opportunity, notice, and an opportunity to go into court and contest the accusations against them. It's a victory for due process. It's not a pure victory for Donald Trump and his program at all. Here's the text, quote, the application to vacate the orders of the United States District Court for the District of Columbia presented to the Chief Justice and by him referred to the court is granted. So they're dissolving the injunction. The March 15th minute orders granting a temporary restraining order and March 28th, 2025 extension by the United States District Court for the District of Columbia are vacated. So that's the victory. No more nationwide injunction. But this is what the majority said. The 5 conservative justices, joined by an agreement the 4 dissenters as well. Listen to this. The detainees also sought equitable relief against summary removal. Although judicial review under the Alien Enemies Act is limited, we have held that an individual subject to detention and removal under that statute is entitled to, quote, judicial review, both as to questions of interpretation and constitutionality of the act, as well as he or she is in fact an alien enemy 14 years of age or older. So you can do 2 things here. You can go into court and you can say it's unconstitutional to invoke the Alien Enemies Act. It's legally invalid. We're not at war. That's not a statute that can be invoked. But you can also say, I'm not an alien enemy. I don't belong to a drug gang. Yeah, I'm in the United States. I sought asylum here, or even maybe I entered the border illegally, but I'm not a member of a drug gang. The only evidence they have, make them show the evidence. Oh, the tattoos? No, this is an autism tattoo. All 9 members of the Supreme Court said they had that due process right. They go on, the majority. AEA detainees must receive notice after the date of this order that they are subject to removal from the United States under the Act. The notice must be afforded within a reasonable time and in such a manner as will allow them to actually seek habeas relief in the proper venue before such removal occurs. The reason I'm emphasizing that all 9 justices of the Supreme Court said that is because I can't tell you how many times I've heard since this all started, this whole controversy. Like, what are you talking about? People, I've heard so many times, what are you talking about? These are people in the United States, these are not citizens, these are people who are non-Americans. People who might even be illegal, they don't have the right of due process. And I kept saying, for 150 years, the Supreme Court has held otherwise. Due process is not a present given by the Bill of Rights to this special group called American citizens. It's intended to be a restraint on the U.S. government with respect to anyone, citizen or not, under the control of the U.S. government. And if that weren't the case, if non-citizens didn't have rights, then Joe Biden could have sent Jordan Peterson to prison for life with no trial for saying, oh, he's jeopardizing national security by criticizing my policies. Do you think conservatives would say, oh yeah, that's constitutional, Jordan Peterson is not an American. He's on U.S. soil, but he has no constitutional rights. Biden can imprison him for life just for, of course not. Courts would instantly say that Jordan Peterson's First Amendment rights were violated, which he has, even though he's a non-citizen. And it's been true forever of people who aren't even in the country legally. As all 9 justices said, they all have due process rights, which have been violated, the people who were sent to El Salvador. Here's Justice Kavanaugh, writing separately from the majority, who wrote to say this, quote, I agree with the court's per curiam opinion, which is when an opinion issued on behalf of the whole court that becomes binding. He says, importantly, as the court stresses, the court's disagreement with the 4 dissenters is not over whether the detainees receive judicial review of their transfers. All 9 members of the court agree that judicial review is available. The only question in dispute is whether where that judicial review should occur, namely in Washington, D.C., or in the place that they're being detained. Here's Justice Sotomayor writing for the dissenters, including Kagan and Jackson, and Amy Coney Barrett joined parts of this opinion. And this is what she writes. Critically, Even the majority today agrees, and the federal government now admits that individuals subject to removal under the Alien Enemies Act are entitled to adequate notice and judicial review before they can be removed. Begin with that upon which all 9 members of the court agree. The court's order today dictates in no uncertain terms that, quote, individuals subject to detention or removal under the Alien Enemies Act are entitled to, quote, judicial review as to questions of interpretation and constitutionality of the act, as well as whether he or she is in fact an alien enemy 14 years of age or older. That means, of course, that the government cannot usher any detainees, including plaintiffs, onto planes in a shroud of secrecy, as it did on March 15th. Nor can the government, quote, immediately resume removing individuals without notice upon vacating the restraining order, as it promised the D.C. court it would do. So there's a court order from the Supreme Court, all 9 justices of the Supreme Court, saying what you did on March 15th in smuggling these people out in secret, no notice that they were going to be removed, no opportunity to go into court. All 9 justices say that's unconstitutional. You cannot do that again. That is not a full victory for the Trump administration. Not at all. It's a victory for due process, for the Constitution, and it should forever bury this idea that non-citizens don't have constitutional rights in the United States. The Supreme Court has always ruled otherwise. They just did again, unanimously, from Justice Thomas and Alito to Kagan and Sotomayor and everybody in between. That's not the only thing a court did. The United States Court of Appeals, which was an appeal from a ruling from a district court that one of the people sent to El Salvador, in particular, Kilmar Armando Abrigo Garcia, was, even by the U.S. government's account, mistakenly sent there because there was a deportation hold on him. He was not permitted by a prior court, a deportation court, to be removed. He's lived in the United States for a long time. He's never been charged with a crime. He's married to an American citizen. They have an American child together that they're raising. The only evidence that he was a member of a gang was that some informant claimed it. There's no evidence of it, so a court put a deportation hold on him. The U.S. government ignored that order, sent him to El Salvador anyway, where he's now wasting away in that same prison. And a district court judge said, you have to get him back. You sent him there unjustly, illegally, and in violation of a court order. You have to get him back from El Salvador. And the Trump administration's position was, what do you mean? We can't control what El Salvador does, which of course is a joke. President Bukele's whole strategy as a country is to make himself and his country as subservient as possible to the United States and Trump. He does whatever Trump tells him to do. That's his whole nationwide strategy. Beyond that, the U.S. is paying El Salvador to keep him in that prison. So you just say, we're not going to pay you, we want him back, we sent you him back mistakenly. Of course El Salvador is going to give him back. So the U.S. government appealed that order from a district court judge, and a federal appeals court, 3 judges, one of whom is an appointee by Ronald Reagan, all 3 ruled that that was a just order, that you cannot send people to El Salvador, an El Salvadoran prison, when there's a deportation hold on them. And this is what 2 of the judges concurring in the opinion wrote. Quote, the panel unanimously agrees that the district court's order requiring the government, quote, to facilitate and effectuate the return of plaintiff Kilmar Armando Abrigo Garcia to the United States by no later than 11:59 p.m. on Monday, April 7th should not be stayed. The government's motion to stay is therefore denied. I write to explain my view. The United States government has no legal authority to snatch a person who is lawfully present in the United States off the street and remove him from the country without due process. The government's contention otherwise, and its argument that the federal courts are powerless to intervene, are unconscionable. I know there's this conservative idea among a lot of Trump supporters that federal courts have no role to play in saying when the president violates the Constitution. What's the point of having a Constitution if the president can just violate it whenever he wants and no other body can do anything about it, including courts? Like, since when does the United States operate that way? Like, oh yeah, we have the Bill of Rights, but if the president just ignores it, violates it, he puts people in prison because of their speech, or sends people to prison with no due process, courts have no business interfering. Who does then? What happens if the president violates the Constitution? Who do you go to if you've been unconstitutionally punished by the government? Who do you go to ask to rule on that? It's always been the courts. Again, conservatives ran into the courts all the time to ask courts to enjoin a rule against Democratic presidents. It's been going on for decades. Just today, I'll give you an example. Because there's this claim that only left-wing judges are doing this, when in reality these injunctions have been across the board ideologically from Republican presidents, from Democratic presidents. Just today, as you might recall, last month or 6 weeks ago, the Trump administration ordered media outlets to refer to what had been the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America. It was a major priority for Donald Trump, that we call this the Gulf of America. Associated Press didn't comply. They kept referring to it as the Gulf of Mexico. And Trump was enraged, and he decided to punish AP by removing and stripping them from all access to cover the president, the White House, the president's plane. And just earlier today, this afternoon, a Trump-appointed federal district judge, appointed by Donald Trump, ruled that if you punish a media outlet because of their refusal to adopt government speech, you obviously violate the First Amendment, the right of the free press, the right of free speech. These are Trump-appointed judges. Amy Coney Barrett is a Trump-appointed judge. So is Neil Gorsuch. And you have them saying these detainees have the right of due process before they can be removed. So I think this is critical to realize. I understand completely that mass immigration is a problem that most people in the country agree needs to be addressed. Trump ran on it. He has every right to do that. A lot of Democrats also say they support that. It's obviously the Democratic will. But above all elected leaders is the Constitution. It's the governing document of the United States. The purpose of the Bill of Rights, in particular, is to limit what majorities can do, to limit what elected officials can do. It puts limits on how they can exercise their power. You can have a majority, 90% of Americans, who say they want to imprison anyone who practices this specific religion, or who doesn't have a religion at all, who are atheists. 90% say imprison them, banish them. Their religion is evil. But you have a clause in the Constitution that guarantees freedom of religion, free exercise of religion. And so even if 90% of the country wants it, even if everyone in Congress or the president wants it, you still can't do it. That's the point of the Bill of Rights. It limits majoritarian power. It's an anti-majoritarian document because the founders were actually afraid of majoritarian mobs. These were very wealthy landowners. They were afraid the majorities would get together and take their land, just seize it. And that's why they put into the Constitution that you cannot deprive somebody of property without due process of law or life or liberty. Because they feared majoritarian mobs. They created a democracy, but not one without limits. The Constitution imposes limits. And no matter how much you want a government to succeed in a goal, you have to respect the limits. You can want the government to combat crime, to do more to put criminals in prison. As much as you might want that, the government still can't authorize the police to break into your house and go house to house into houses with no warrants, even if that would help their cause of catching criminals, because the Bill of Rights says they can't do that. They can't go into anyone's house without a warrant. It's a limit on police power, on government power. Even though it may help criminals get away, it's a liberty that we guaranteed with the Bill of Rights and that we should all support. Same thing with privacy rights and not being searched or surveilled without a warrant as well in the Fourth Amendment. These are foundational rights that define what the United States is. Nationalists always say, oh, America's not just a landmass, it's not just a country attached to a bank or a shopping mall. It has certain values, certain traditions. These are the traditions. These are the founding of the United States. It's its identity. And if you're willing to authorize any politician, including the president, to just run roughshod over the Bill of Rights, including as interpreted by the Supreme Court that includes 3 of his own appointees, then you don't really believe in America at all. You might say you do, but if you don't care about the Bill of Rights, if you think the president has the right to ignore it or transgress it, I don't see how you can say you believe in American values at all. Unfortunately, there are judges, including ones who get appointed by a president, but nonetheless stay faithful to the principles that they're supposed to uphold rather than the individual or the party, who are increasingly affirming that as well. And I think it's very important for the balance of power in our system. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.